an introduction. I also want to point out, I don't know where he is. There he is. My dad is here. Henry Anderson. Can you wave? My dad is from Meadowlands, Minnesota. So I got a lot of ties up here, although we live in the cities, but the guys still come up here and hunt in that area, but they're not that successful. Sorry, Dad. But they're out at the clip joint more than they're out in the bush hunting. So, but I just want to recognize my father. I'm really pleased and honored to speak to you today. It's really exhilarating to see so many patriots who are laboring at the rebirth of freedom, a rebirth of government, of, by, and for the people. And as a former state auditor, I can tell you that the devil often hides in the details of government policy. But we're not gathered today simply to protest a single government policy. There's far more at stake than the fate of any one piece of legislation. The devil today isn't found in the details of the 1,000-page bills unread by our members of Congress. He hides in plain sight. He lies in the rampant and the unrepentant rush by the governing elite to classical corporate socialism, or almost a friendly fascism. Allegiance to the truth demands that things be called what they are. And fascism isn't an insult. It has an academic definition. Government policy today is an integration of government with private corporations that destroys any meaningful distinction between the public and the private sectors. Our government is pursuing a philosophy that must necessarily evolve disrespect and intolerance for individual liberty and limited government. So when government requires that everyone purchases health care and offers its own public option, there's no longer a meaningful distinction between the public and the private sector. And you know what seniors call Obamacare? They call it a shovel-ready project. When government absorbs major automakers and institutes a cash for clunkers program to stimulate their own auto industry, the public and the private sector are virtually one and the same. And when government forces partnerships on major financial institutions, it blurs the public-private distinction to near invisibility. And when our government takes the ultimate step of taxing and restricting energy use, the light of the public-private distinction is extinguished altogether. Our federal government is pursuing a philosophy that must necessarily be supported by coercion. Ultimately, it cannot tolerate even the most minuscule amount of individual liberty, and that's why we're here today. We stand against a federal takeover of health care, against the government takeover of private businesses, against government stimulus programs that drive up our debts and redistribute the real wealth of this country. And we stand against taxing and restricting energy use through cap and trade policies. But first and foremost, we gather today, standing here, proud and tall, in support of the inalienable rights of Americans, individual sovereignty, private property, and the rule of law. It's our rights defined in the Declaration of Independence, which is protected by the U.S. Constitution, that struggles to be reborn this year. You know, we have a government with ADD, it's American Deficit Disorder. It's spending money like a 16-year-old with no job and a new credit card. And our federal government has put our children deep into debt, and it's a debt which they will struggle to climb out of their entire lives. Our enemy here is an attitude. It's the un-American and the blatantly false notion that there is and there ought to be a government response to every problem of society. And there's an attitude among our leaders of they're smarter than thou. Those people in Washington and St. Paul who have the knowledge and the constitutional authorities, or they think they do, to better manage our lives than we can. And you know, the war on climate change is the perfect personification of the belief that there's a government solution to every problem. And it also illustrates the inevitable march of such policy. Cap and trade is the ultimate coercion. It dictates how much energy you can use, and it establishes the parameters of how you may use it. And to ensure that you obey, it taxes you and it fines you if you step out of line, all to support the arrogant and the ignorant notion that the ruling elite can use the power of government to manage the temperature of a small planet in a large universe over a century of time within a few degrees. And this is all for no regard for the science that says that climate change is natural. It's related to the sun, and it's been going on since the birth of our planet. We were covered in glaciers. And at another time, Greenland was green. So Al Gore, this is not as simple as inventing the internet. This is not just a case of politicians over-promising and under-delivering. When individuals become so corrupted by power and so consumed by arrogance that they fail to recognize their ignorance, the danger to our individual liberty and a prosperity is far more significant than a few broken promises. We have leadership in Washington and St. Paul that believes that there's no limit to government power. They continue to demand more authority, and when their demands are met with resistance, they find a way to seize the power they want. Nothing stands against their will except the will of we, the people. If cap and trade, the stimulus package, cash for clunkers, healthcare reform, the like, were just misdirected public policy, it would be bad enough. But remember, when President Obama promised, when he announced his campaign, he said he was running so he could transform the nation. And he was going to take up the unfinished business of perfecting our union. Now that's more than just an ambitious agenda. It's an obsession with power. It's an obsession with recreating the world in his own image and of replacing our unalienable rights that are bestowed by our Creator with a limited set of pseudo-rights bestowed by the government. But let's not let off our elected members of Congress so easily. The founders intended that the President and the Congress often stand in opposition to one another. The Constitution gives the President veto power to restrain Congress when it passes laws that overstep constitutional bounds. And it gives Congress the power of the purse to stop presidential excess. But when Congress and the President share the common end of control over the sovereignty and the property of the people, it's for the responsibility of the people to defend the Constitution and the rule of law. In the Declaration of Independence, Thomas Jefferson recognized how difficult the defense of liberty may be. He understood that people are more disposed to suffer while evils are sufferable. He argued that government should not be challenged for light and transient causes. But he went on to point out that when a long train of abuses, pursuing invariably the same object, evinces a design to reduce the people under absolute despotism, it is their right and it is their duty to throw off such government and to provide new guards for their future security. Now, the healthcare crisis, the financial crisis, the energy crisis, and above all, the global warming crisis, they all propose an expansion of federal and presidential authority that would astound and dismay the founders. and still our government demands more power. Now, unlike the Patriots in 1776, we're not dissatisfied with our form of government. Rather, we're here to defend constitutional government against leaders who would pervert the rule of law to transform the country for their own ends. We are here today to say no to a president and a Congress that would take over private businesses. We're here to say no to a president and a Congress that would make our health care decisions for us. And we're here to say no to a president and a Congress that would use climate change as an excuse to cap our prosperity and to trade away our national sovereignty. We are here today. We're here to say yes to constitutional government, yes to freedom, and yes to liberty, and yes to the fundamental principles of individual sovereignty, private property, and the rule of law that make America the greatest country in the world. Amen. We are here today to tell the political elite in Washington and in St. Paul, yes, this is still the land of the free and the home of the brave. Don't tread on us. And a free people is about to take back this country. Thank you.